So for the new year, I have decided to go in a little bit different direction. In the past, I've been doing a series using the lectionary, and we may go back to that after we finish up this little series, but I've been hanging out in the book of James and my personal devotions, and so kind of wanted to take a look and do a little series looking at some of the passages in James because, it is the new year, and in the new year, we're all about making resolutions about how to be better incarnations of ourselves. And, let's face it, most of the time it lasts till about the end of January, and then we give up on eating right and exercising and that kind of thing. But the book of James is one of the more unique books in the New Testament because it's a book that focuses on action, on making sure that the faith that we have changes our life, and we put ourselves out there and actually live out the things that we say we believe. It is one of my absolute favorite books in the New Testament, probably my second favorite book in the whole Bible, behind the Gospel of Matthew. And so the next few weeks, I want to take just a little bit of time and go over this book and just some things in it. And today we're going to be talking about what it means to be a tribe who listens, because one of the things we want to pull out of this is that it isn't just about doing church individually, but it's about being together in a community. And so these, if you want to call them resolutions or ways of being or whatever you want to call them, they are more about us doing it together in community. And it is time to do something. Here we are at the start of a new year, so it's a good time to start these new things. A lot of people would say that the modern church today is dying. And if you look at different types of measures and articles that come out every couple of months, they lament how the amount of pastors who are leaving the ministry and not being replaced, or the decrease in the amount of people who are coming to church, and even evangelical churches are seeing it now, where it used to just be, we talk about the mainline churches, but we're seeing it more in the evangelical denominations as well. Now, before you think this is some sort of sermon railing against modern society or the younger generations, you know me, I'm not that kind of person. It's not a culture, it's not, a fight against culture. The truth is that contrary to what we think, culture is always in flux. It's never been a set thing. Each new generation develops their own sets of cultural boundaries. If anything has failed, it is probably the church itself. And me being a pastor, that's big that I would admit that. The church has become too confident, in my opinion, in its own power to influence people. And when that power has been taken away, when people have decided to no longer consider the church as the authority in their life, for good or for ill, because sometimes there are good reasons for that, rather than humbly submit to a season of self-searching to see why we're no longer being relevant, it seems that we have a lot of leaders who will get out and engage with media, and it's like a toddler who is screaming that they want their way and threatening to hold their breath until people listen to it. And then, of course, more people leave the church behind, and it's considered even more irrelevant. And so people have this image that the church that is dying. But if we're honest with ourselves, the church has always kind of went through these cycles, and dying isn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, our whole faith is built on the premise that Jesus died and was raised again. I find it funny that we're so scared of death when in reality the cornerstone of our faith is that we have to die to ourselves in order to be born again. So death isn't always bad, and it isn't something to be feared. But where does that leave us as a church? We, who are a young church, we've been around about 7 years, and we've chosen this difficult moment in church history to start our journey. Where does that leave us now? How do we communicate the gospel message to a world that doesn't really seem to be all that interested in it? That is what we're called to do, right? Tell the old story? Yes, we are. But it can't begin with telling. I have discovered something about myself, a deep truth. I am a terrible listener. I really am. I tend to overtalk people in my life, or only take in enough information about whatever it is that they are telling me so that I can give an intelligent sounding response. Or let's face it, sometimes I just flat out ignore people. So if I were to articulate a first step for the church, a new beginning, it would begin with us learning how to listen. And there's two parts to this. We need to learn to listen to God and listen to others. But we don't value listening. We value speaking. We want to communicate our rightness or our solution to a problem. It's all about insisting on my rights. I mean, it's probably even less about speaking and more about spewing. While social media is what it is, and it isn't going away, and it does have some benefits in nurturing it in, I would say, in the wide world, nurturing a culture of listening isn't one of them. By design, it isn't meant for deep communication about any subject, and has contributed, in my opinion, to the flattening and shallowing of the world. However, if we are to be real people of faith who care about others, we need to learn how to nurture listening and other disciplines. And that's why over the next few weeks, I want to spend some time in this book of James. Like I said, I love James because it is about learning how to live the life of faith. I think if there was an immortal line in this whole book that we are going to talking about over the next few weeks, it is this, and it's from the 2nd chapter. Faith without works is dead. Faith has to do something. It has to change the fabric of who you are and shape you into the person God wants you to be. Belief has to change your nature, or it doesn't do anyone any good. While Paul focuses on the faith side of things, James's focus is on taking that faith and doing something with it. But if your faith is going to do something, it has to know what to do. It has to be able to hear something and follow it. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. So I know I rarely fall into a classic 3-point sermon, but this is one of those where we have 3 points. Point 1, quick to listen. How easy is it to really listen? I like the meme that was circulating recently on Facebook, and it starts with the line, "Honey, you weren't even listening to me, were you?" To which the response line is, "That's a funny way to start a conversation." And I will be the first to admit that really listening to people is hard. It's much easier just to half listen to what they are saying. But for James, the life of a devout follower of Jesus is marked by being able to listen deeply. We have to be a people who take in what others are saying without immediately needing to speak a response or pass judgment on it. But before we become effective listeners for other people, we begin by learning to listen to God. I mean, let's face it, how well do we really listen to God? How long in our prayers do we sit in silence waiting for God to speak? If you're like me, most of our prayer time is spent talking to God about our problems or prayer requests. I'm trying to get an answer out of God, but I really want Him to be quick about it. I also know that just like with people, I tend to talk over God, lest He begin to really work on my heart and want to talk about the really dark places of my soul. You see, I've discovered that I want to listen to God when He says that I am His dearly loved child, and even when I need advice about some small little sins in my life, but I don't want to listen to Him when He really starts probing the deeps of my soul. And when He does point them out, I am quick to respond with either justification or anger. You know, it was the other person's fault, or, "God, I'm doing the best I can here. You're the one who called me to be a pastor after all. How else am I supposed to deal with the balance of this life?" You see, I have it reversed. I'm slow to really listen and quick to speak. But for the follower of Jesus, we must learn to change our natural response pattern. What one of my favorite pastors, Nadia Bolz-Weber, calls the first thought wrong syndrome. Our first reaction to God shouldn't be self-justification, but self-reflection. When God speaks, especially when He is speaking deep truths that can be painful for us to hear, our response should be, "Tell me more. Tell me more, God, about the ways to draw closer to You. Tell me more about abandoning my own self-interest, God, because I have great intentions and even some great starts at it, but I still get trapped by my own self. I seek no justification." If the church is to come back to life, the first thing it must do is learn to listen to God. In fact, I have a modest proposal. I think everyone who professes to be a Christian should stop talking to the media or insisting on our own rights for 2 years. I'm calling on a moratorium. We speak neither good or ill. We just stop talking and say we are going to enter into a season of listening to God. Moreover, we're going to engage with all kinds of people as well, And we're going to make a covenant to listen to them as well. Of course, this ability to actively listen to God should translate into our ability to actively listen to other people. Listen to people who have been hurt by the church, to other cultures, other voices of Christianity besides our own. When they say something that offends us, we don't quickly jump to anger or a defensive posture, but we humbly ask ourselves, how did that person arrive there at that particular opinion? How were they shaped by their environment? We look them in the eyes and we say, tell me more. The second point, we need to learn to be slow to speak. And this one is a tough one for me. I am a talker. I talk a lot. It's a gift, sometimes. More often than not, though, is a curse. I tend to speak before I think about the repercussions of what I'm saying. I can make flippant statements that wound deeply before I realize what I have said. In a book, if two people are sitting together and not watching TV or on their phones, we call that silence uncomfortable. You see, we feel the need to fill the space with words. We need to stop doing that. I need to stop doing that. To really listen to others, we have to take a pause in speaking. James isn't saying stop speaking altogether. Rather, be slow and carefully deliberate with our words, making sure we are honoring the person we are speaking to. Because if we practice being quick to listen and slow to speak, then the third point corrects itself. Slow to become angry. It seems everyone in the world is angry about something. Oh, sure, we want to disguise it in all kinds of ways, righteous indignation, self-justification. But let's face it, we're really just angry. For James, taming runaway emotions goes hand in hand with learning how to listen. We have to learn to control our need for self-justification and anger, because human anger never produces the godly life. Now, I do want to be clear, there are things that should produce anger within us. There are things that anger God. The Bible names a few. One of the chief is abuse of the poor and the outcast. But the thing that distinguishes the righteous anger from human anger is that righteous anger wants to fix the system. It understands that the rich oppressors are just as trapped, and perhaps even more so than those they oppress. Righteous anger seeks to set all people free from sin. If your anger doesn't put you in a place where that is the thought, then it is human anger. Get rid of all moral filth and evil that is prevalent. James doesn't pull any punches here. He wants us to live examined lives. When we look at how we live, what are the things that hold us back from God? Well, what exactly are those things? You know, we want the list, but you know what they are. The funny thing is that when you begin to really listen to the voice of God, you will know what things you need to get rid of. You don't need me or any other pastor to make a list for you. Besides, what is a temptation for me may not be one for you. Some of you have probably listened to this whole sermon and thought, wow, I have none of these problems. Pastor Marcus is one messed up guy, which is true. But you have your own spots. Work on those. Let God point out ways and things you need to change. You see, I firmly believe that as a church, we don't trust God enough to work in people. Throughout the New Testament, we are clearly reminded that God is judge and we are not. We still like to be God's police force. I'm not going to judge you. That is God's job. But here's what the Bible says. I'm just going to tell you that. That's still not our job. Our job is to help people on the journey to God, to trust God to work in their souls. But I will tell you that you need to let Him work. Ignoring God will not fix your life. Only committing yourself halfway to God won't fix your life. You have to be all in or not at all. To do that, you have to come before God with a sense of humility. And there's another one of those areas I have trouble with. But in order to truly listen to God, I have to embrace humility. Why? Because I have to admit that I don't have any of the right answers. You can't truly listen to God if you think you're right all the time. You can't truly listen to another human being if you think you are 100% right all the time. So there you have it, people. It's time to start listening. So as part of our, assignment, if you will, for the new year and this church is this next week I want you to take some time to really work on your listening skills. First, I want you to take some time to really learn to listen to God. When you get into a prayer situation with God, don't start naming off all of these things that you're praying about. Be it for money or health or even people around us. But take time to listen, really listen to God's voice. The second thing I want you to do is to find people in your life and take the time to really listen to a person in a conversation. Use that phrase, tell me more. Try to dig a little bit deeper and try to foster those relationships. And it could be anybody. You could pick somebody within your family, or it could be someone who's completely different than you if you have that opportunity. But take the time to really foster that sense of listening, because we can't really begin to act on the things of God that we know until we learn to listen.